Well, what's up, guys? Ben Carey here of Capwise. Joining me is Rob Vino of Rob Vino Sports. We are going to break down a few college football games this Saturday, week two. First and foremost, Rob, how are you doing today?
Good, Ben. It's middle of the week here, so obviously trying to get over hump day. But with the NFL added to our plate now, week one, right? It becomes even more crowded and longer days. But it's good. We head into Thursday night football with a couple of college games and a big NFL game. So yeah, good stuff. Just busy this time of year. That's all.
It's a great time of the year, though. Busy, but if you love it, it's
Right.
nothing. So yeah. So quick recap on how you personally did, or maybe just what you saw over the week one there. We'll start with that and then head into a few of these games.
All right. Well, real quick, client selections over at wagertalk.com produced a small profit. It could have been bigger, Ben, and probably, I was on the wrong end of the West Virginia Maryland game over 57 points.
Yeah, my
At
other buddy
four.
Kyle Hunter was on that too. I think
Yeah,
that
and
was a
what a heartbreaker. What a
yeah, that's a bad
heartbreaker
one.
because it seemed like it was correct. You have 41 at halftime and ample opportunities in the second half. Just West Virginia continued to give it away. And then even down to the last second in college football, you're always there because Maryland, just trying to run out the clock, breaks through the line of scrimmage, and it's a foot race to the end zone and happened to get caught at like the 6 yard line where the game ended. So that would have really opened up the gap because that was the biggest play I had this weekend. But even with that loss, we pulled a small profit, concluding with Mississippi in the first half Monday night. I think we laid six and a
Nice,
half. Was 26-0 at
no sweat
halftime,
there.
something like that. Nah, it was fairly
Yeah,
easy for them. And stuff that we noticed, and there was plenty of it, right? I will say this right out of the chute because I don't think this gets enough attention. But the Florida Gators running for 400 yards on Saturday, and Dan Mullen is back with the style of quarterback that he prefers. If we remember him from his Mississippi State days when he had Dak Prescott,
hmm
and of course he's an Urban Meyer disciple, right? So he loves the dual threat, the run pass ability, and it made me think that there's a lot of really smart offensive minds out there, but the fact that this is what he prefers, and the fact that he did what he did last year with Kyle Trask, a pretty much a drop back passer, period, right? And,
yeah,
and they set all kinds of records. I think the general perception was that Florida was losing Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney, the quarterback Trask, and they would be down this year. But I don't know. That offense looked pretty good to me, and that's the way Dan Mullen prefers it.
yeah.
So they were a big certainly eye opener. And we saw a couple of FCS teams, right? Montana pulls an upset
Big
over the
Sky, man. I
Washington.
tell you what, I think they went 7-0 or 8-0. I think against the spread.
Yep.
Couple outright winners. UC Davis, Montana. I mean,
Weber
you know
State.
what? Now looking back at it, I it's hard to say this is why, but as someone who played college football in the past, I really think having those practices up till May, I think benefited them just a little bit. Not to say that's the sole reason why we saw these wins, but I think it benefited them.
Yeah, some spring football. And how about Montana? Didn't even they opted out totally. They hadn't played since 2019,
Yeah,
and Montana pulls the upset. But you're right. Southern Utah, Northern Colorado, right in your neck of the woods.
that
There,
was a
they
pretty
get the
easy
cover.
cover for us, and that was one we were on. CU just vanilla offense, like kind of
Right.
what I expected. So that was good. Were you on BYU?
I was on the under,
Oh, you were on
which
the
was
under. Okay,
yeah, so it stayed under fairly
I
easily
was
that
on
day.
BYU. It started off good, but they kind of took the foot off the gas a
Mm.
little bit in that second half. And props to Jeb Fish. They played hard. I'm not gonna lie, but you know, still it's gonna be a long season with that schedule they have. So let's hop on into it. We have
Yeah,
three games to discuss. Three pretty good ones. I think three of these three that we're going to discuss are going to be three games that most people are going to watch to some extent. And Rob pointed out right before we hopped on, we actually have one in the morning, one kind of midday afternoon, and then one to end the day. So works out pretty well for us. So let's start with the early action. Oregon versus Ohio State. I'm showing Ohio State currently at 14.5, the favorite in the horseshoe. Total, it actually jumped up to 64. I'm showing 63.5 still in some spots, opened around 62-ish. So obviously we're seeing a little bit of steam there, but let's just start with what you're eyeing in this one, if you're going to have a play, and what you're looking for.
Well, I think the initial lean here midweek would be toward the over based off of what we saw in week one. If we go back to Friday night when Ohio State played Minnesota, Minnesota runs for 203 yards in that game. And there's those who had Minnesota plus points and cover real easily that fully believe that if Muhammad Ibrahim doesn't get hurt, Minnesota may win that game. They ran it that well against that defense, and they threw it well. 203 on the ground, 205 through the air, and Ohio State's defensive problems continue. Insiders to that program will tell you that the problem is with the scheme and not with the players on the field. And I guess that stands to reason. You have a bunch of 5-stars running around out there, so they just don't really grasp what they're supposed to be doing. But Minnesota looked really good. Ohio State's defense looked bad. And if I flip that coin and look at how Oregon played defensively after the Thibodeau injury especially, but there was a point in the first quarter, I'd say, Ben, and I'm a guy who had a first half over 30.5 tickets. So it winds up 31. They score a touchdown with like 16 seconds left in the half. But the first 3 or 4 drives of that game for Fresno, really it looked like they weren't going to go anywhere all day long. Oregon's defense was a swarm all over them. And I started thinking to myself, I was giving Kalen DeBoer, head coach of Fresno, a really good offensive coach, the benefit of the doubt to get something done. But all of a sudden, I think it was like a 3-play stretch where Oregon lost 2 defensive players, and then a couple players later, they lost Thibodeau. And things started to change at that point. And it'll be interesting to see if Thibodeau plays this week. It's still up in the air, right? He's probably your number 1 draft pick overall. But I didn't like what I saw out of their defense, and especially against what Ohio State's bringing on the offensive side. It looked like C.J. Stroud finally got acclimated in the second half.
I know. The first quarter, people wanted to claim, he's going to be a bust. I'm like, this is the first quarter of the whole entire season against a pumped-up team. He's on the road. Calm down. And then surely he kind of figured it out later in the second half.
And I would give some credit to the Ohio State coaching staff because, I was having this discussion with a guy, and he pointed out, he said, I'd like to throw Minnesota's defensive coordinator under the bus for a moment and pointed out all the long touchdowns that they gave up third quarter. And I think you can reverse that, Ben, and say that Ohio State went to the locker room, saw something that they thought they could take advantage of because there was. Now, one of them was a screen pass that wound up going 70 yards. I get it. But there were a couple of deep balls thrown that weren't thrown in the first half. So it could be a little bit of Stroud being acclimated, could be a little bit of an adjustment, whatever. But the quarterback competition in this game, Anthony Brown against C.J. Stroud, could very well decide it because Anthony Brown, in spurts, yes, but overall, not that great, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, he really didn't do anything amazing out there, to say how both these quarterbacks did in their first performance with their team. A little different because Anthony Brown's at transfer, but C.J. Stroud definitely had the more impressive game. So I looked at something really interesting because Minnesota absolutely controlled the clock in that one. Ohio State's time of possession was 93rd out of 96 teams for qualifying teams. And the data source I use, they just don't break it down if a team played an FCS opponent. But yeah, they were almost dead last in time of possession. They only had 48 plays, which was tied last with Kansas State. But 45 points they put up was tied 7th. So, we're not trying to say that based on this ratio, Ohio State's going to score 70 points. That's not how it works. But what I will say is the offense was pretty efficient when they had the ball. And if you take out that first quarter with, the first quarter ever of his career in college football, Ohio State looked pretty damn good offensively. So that's the biggest thing I was looking at. I got in at this number pretty early at 63. I still like it at 64. I think it's, you know what? It's hard to say what it's going to end at, but I think it's going to continue to climb, and I think it should. So I like the over in this one. I don't really have an opinion on the side just because of the injury, like you mentioned. But I'd probably lean, I guess, Oregon. But we got to see his status first. So that's kind of what I'm eyeing on in this one.
And if he's missing, that accelerates the play on the over, I would think, because
It
then you
should,
don't
yeah.
have the pass rush. I mean, Thibodeau is a home wrecker. Oh my goodness, off the edge, he's in the backfield, disruptive, creating havoc. So we'll see. Without him, Ohio State could have an easier day. And I do think Oregon's got enough skill position players to certainly put up points here. The wrench into this, Ben, is the time start, right? It's a 9 o'clock Pacific start for Oregon, so they're going to,
Yeah.
and obviously veteran head coach Mario Cristobal, but they're going to have to get themselves ready to play a noon Eastern game. It's a little different than the Washington Huskies are coming into the Eastern time zone as well to play Michigan, but that game's prime time, 8 at night, which is a little different for the West Coast team, right? Oregon drew the short end of the stick here. Ohio State was home week 1, they're home week 2, and now they get you when one of those, we know it's a lot is made of that in the NFL when a team has to come west east and play a 1 o'clock Eastern game. This is the same situation except an hour earlier, so it could be tough on Oregon.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of where the line's at. It's hard to say, like, is this line predicting Thibodeau to be in? Or sorry, it's not Thibodeau. It's is it that's how you say his name?
Thibodeau, they call him.
Thibodeau. 14 and a half. It's kind of like a little bit of both. I could see if he's announced in, maybe it goes back to 14. If not, it could jump up to 15. It feels like it's kind of, I guess, I don't know. It's kind of leaning toward maybe he isn't going to play. But again, we'll see if any news comes out in the next few days on that one. So, yeah, that's going to be an exciting game. I want to see what Oregon's really made of because they didn't look great against Fresno State. So I want to see if they're going to be a team that is going to compete for the Pac-12, championship. This is a great spot on the road for them to show what they're made of. So let's hop on into our second one. Iowa State. I think this is the first time these two teams have played, both ranked in the top 10. Actually, it might even be, I thought it was even ranked, but that doesn't sound correct. It has to be top 10. You think at some point in time, both these teams were ranked, but who knows? Both teams in the top 10. The game is in Ames, so it's Iowa State home game, -4.5. Totals at 46. So Iowa State didn't look great in their opener. Iowa did, yet they're still getting 4.5. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and Iowa definitely looked, and when you consider the opponent, Indiana, right? Indiana was an off-season, preseason darling. The bandwagon for Indiana fans couldn't be bigger heading in. And for Indiana, I guess you could say it would be hard to get any better than what they did last year under Tom Allen. So maybe the only way to go would have been down.
They peaked.
They peaked maybe. Well, Iowa's defense, Ben, the one unit that really was impressive last week. They held Indiana, and this is with Michael Penix Jr., right? He's back. He's healthy. He's 100%. They only get 11 first downs. They only run for 2.5 a carry. And their running back now, their starting running back is Stephen Carr, a USC transfer senior who's had a lot of success in the Pac-12, but only 2.5 a carry, only 233 total yards. Iowa picks off a couple of passes and brings them back to the house. They had a 56-yard run out of Goodson. They looked really, really good to dominate a good offense like that. And I would say that, maybe Iowa State's a shade better, but Indiana is very comparable offensively to what Iowa is. Penix and Purdy, comparable. The running game, comparable. The receiving core. So you get that same type of opponent here. They did not play last year. This rivalry is usually played every year, but because
Yeah.
Big Ten started late, they didn't get their game in. Iowa's won the last four. Iowa State didn't look good against Northern Iowa, but I would preface that by saying Northern Iowa on an FCS level is annually one of your 5, 6 best defenses in the
Hmm.
country. So for them to shut a team down, if especially if they're not 100% all in for that game, where Iowa State may have had an eye ahead on this game.
Yeah.
But Northern Iowa played really good defense. Iowa State didn't look good. They look good defensively, but not offensively. That can all change here. But I would say at 4.5, I'd rather have the points with this defense of Iowa's after seeing what they did in week one than I would lay them. This game inevitably comes down to a field goal in most cases. Here you get 4.5. You have to get some play out of Petrus, the quarterback for Iowa, who's pedestrian at best.
Hmm.
He doesn't really thrill it. But Iowa offensively is always pedestrian at best.
Yeah.
So
It's almost like, hey, we're fine with that.
they
um,
really are.
were there two pick sixes?
There were two.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
34, you know, granted, let's give them credit, right? They're a good defense, but two pick sixes, that's a little misleading. I don't think they're going to have two pick sixes today. They could have some points off turnovers. So I'm personally leaning on the under in this one at 46. It's interesting. It did open at 45 and it moved up a little bit, but I think the under for me is going to be the play. But I also kind of could see some correlation between the under and Iowa covering this because if for some reason Iowa State can, get hot and get some momentum, this could be a game that goes over. But I agree with you. I think Iowa can keep it close. That defense looked really well. They have a lot of veteran players. It's a rivalry game. I know that sometimes can be played out, but I mean, these two teams have had a lot of close games, and I think it's going to be a great matchup. So I also like the plus 4.5. I think getting plus 4.5 is a gift here.
Yeah, Indiana last week had 14 possessions, and they only crossed midfield twice. That's pretty good defense
Yeah.
out of Iowa. And I think, Ben, I probably don't have this 100% accurate, but I'm right in the ballpark here after hearing it a couple of times this week. Iowa now has a string of, I think it's 22 consecutive games where they've allowed 24 or less. So when you're talking about betting an under, that's the kind of team you want, right? 24 or
That's
less. Even if the winning side,
yeah.
Iowa State, gets 24, this game's basically an under.
Yeah, that's consistency, and I think as guys like us, I mean, that's something you have to look for, right? And Iowa's going to want to slow the ball or the clock down. They're going to they're going to control the time of possession in this one, especially on the road. So yeah, I like that too. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence of playing both the 4.5 plus 4.5 and 46, but that can get a little tricky if I do think it is correlated because I did something similar with Colorado State last week with San Diego State, which just looked like a stupid play, seeing how they were on the field. But I basically said, hey, I think the game's going to go under and CSU is really going to control the clock and have a lead. And it was the exact opposite. And there are a lot of points scored, and obviously Colorado State didn't cover. So that's just something to watch for if you did want to play both of these here. So, and you're saying you probably like the plus 4.5 is going to be your best play here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they bet it up. Let's say this off of the opener. Iowa State money came in. And again, that's another team, as we see by the ranking, that was an off-season, preseason magazine or whatever, prognostication darling. Everybody's in love with Iowa State this year. And
Yeah, Purdy.
Iowa just goes under the radar all the time, right, with Kirk Ferentz. They do what they do. They go unnoticed. And
yeah, because they're never a top one or two team more times than not out of the Big Ten. So that's, to your point, kind of why they do go a little bit under the radar.
it's a good defense to take 4.5 with.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. I'm excited. I have some friends who are big Hawkeyes fans, and they definitely look forward to this game. So they're asking me what I think, and I'm like, well, I don't know. It's gonna be a tight one. Of course, they wanted me to give them that affirmation that I like the plus 4.5, but yeah, it's gonna be a fun one. So from one rivalry to another rivalry, Utah BYU. This is, I think they call it the Holy War. These two programs, teams, they don't like each other, but you get some fun matchups. Not only in football, also with college basketball too. But we're on the turf in this one. BYU home team in Provo. I'm showing -7 total at 48. I believe this opened around 6, maybe even 5.5. What do you see,
Yeah,
5.5 or 6?
yeah. Utah opened 5.5, and they've been pushed all the way to 7 on the
Yeah,
road here.
which is interesting. And at 7, you have to think though there's going to be some kind of sharp action the other way, right? At a touchdown, or do you still think?
Well, I think a lot of the line moves that we've seen this week, Ben, are reactionary to what people saw in week one, and this would be no different. I mean, you
Mhm.
started to talk about the BYU Arizona game, which was second half kind of unimpressive, right? In fact, to me, BYU built that lead, and they're playing a team. You and I talked about Arizona last week, a team that is coming in with complete overhaul of systems
Yeah.
and quarterbacks that have only been in spread offenses and shotguns their entire lives, and now they're going to play 35% of the time under center, and they're going to play pro style. The change was just so dramatic. And yet they come out and they throw for 345 yards against BYU. And I know a lot of times people say it's garbage yardage, but there is another side to that coin, which says, the old adage is when you have a team down and they have to throw, you can pin your ears back and rush the passer, right? So it's
Mhm.
not just it's garbage time. Of course, they're going to
Yeah.
complete passes. It's like they're going to throw. Let's get some heat on this guy. In Arizona, with a transfer quarterback from Washington State, absolutely lit it up in the
They
second
did.
half.
They
Um,
really did. And again, I was surprised to see Arizona kind of compete like that. But yeah, they did make look BYU at times look a little questionable on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that this line opening at a 6 up to a 7 is indicative of that. And a lot of people are expecting the same thing from Utah.
and where Utah's concerned, traditionally their quarterbacks are kind of dual threat. They're not necessarily pure passers, but Charlie Brewer, the Baylor transfer, is a pure passer.
Hmm.
And last week, Charlie Brewer opened up, and I think this is relevant, Ben. A lot of times in week one, you can toss games aside that are played FBS, large favorite, over an FCS, because not all FCS teams aren't created equal, obviously. But
Yeah.
when you play Weber State, like Northern Iowa, annually the last 4 or 5 years is one of your best defenses in the nation, and Utah put 40 on them. And to me, I
Hmm.
took a little notice of that because Weber State's not easy to get points on, but they
No.
put 40 on them. Brewer, I think, was 17 of 22 for like 77% and over 200 yards throwing, and their defense on all three levels was tremendous. So I think that if you're weak in the secondary, which it would appear to me that BYU at least has some nicks in their
Hmm.
coverage. And then you're going to face Charlie Brewer and a host of veteran receivers. If there's one advantage in this game, I think it's the Utah pass game against the BYU pass defense. The run games against one another, we know that they both can form brick walls. Utah, I think, is a little bit better. Utah, really, to me, might be the best team in the Pac 12. We're going to find out, but so many returnees and they're so physical. They just really grinded Weber State down and
Yeah.
kept putting points up in the fourth.
And they didn't cover that game, but I will say though, there was a kickoff return for a touchdown from Weber State. So I mean, they put up 17, but I think I mean, not to say it was close, but it definitely wasn't close. Utah, if they wanted, they could have probably run up the score. So I think you make a good point though about these FCS games because naturally a lot of offenses are going to hold back. They're not going to show any exotic looks. They don't need to. It would be silly to do so, especially when Utah is preparing for BYU. You don't want to put anything on film. But an interesting stat I saw, and I haven't really confirmed this. Someone messaged me about it. Said the home team in this series is 1-8 ATS, which is interesting. I have a feeling that they're 2-8 over the last 10 because a lot of times people will they'll give you a trend to kind of fit their agenda there. I almost could guarantee that it's 2-10 over the last 10, but it is interesting to see that just because I think maybe the home team gets a little love, but I think in this one, I think the number is where it should be. Do you see this moving to a 7.5?
Boy, that would be a big move. I think the push to 7 was big to begin with
Yeah,
because
I
most
agree.
power ratings with BYU at home wouldn't even have made them 5.5. But again, what happened last week carries a lot of weight because the odds maker has to anticipate what's going to come to the window, and
Mhm.
they know everybody saw Utah look pretty good. I'm not going to say that people know a lot about Weber State. They probably just think Weber State's another team, but they did see BYU get passed on quite a bit. So you anticipate that. Jaron Hall at quarterback for BYU.
I thought he checked the boxes. What do you think?
Yeah, he looked
Yeah.
pretty good. But what you notice about them in that game, and again, I don't know that that's a game where you play vanilla when you're playing a Pac-12 team. I think you come out, you use your playbook for
They
sure
definitely
against
did in the first
Arizona.
half, and then I don't know if they necessarily stopped calling plays they should have. I think it was just more a product of Arizona made some adjustments in the second.
And compared to Zach Wilson's team last year with that offensive line, it seemed like there's a little less explosiveness to the BYU offense, or not as willing. Like Zach Wilson's a gunslinger, right? They were going to push the ball
Yep.
vertically, and I don't know that that exists this year. With Charlie Brewer, we know him from Baylor. They'll push the football now, so it'll be interesting to see. I just don't know. It might be out of my price range, to tell you the truth, at this point. You get to 7 in a game like this, and you talked about it a little bit. I don't think the casual fan realizes how heated a rivalry this is. They do genuinely dislike, and that's probably being nice,
If you were to
dislike
put top
each other.
5 most hated rivalries in college football, I would say no. This is top 3. Like, and you can
Yes. So,
arguably maybe even one, but you could argue. People love to argue and say ours is worse. But I mean, this goes back, I think, to like the early 1900s. Like, I hate to get into like political, but there's like a whole there's a lot that is built into this rivalry, and that's some people don't like that, but I think it makes college football beautiful because we're gonna give it our all, and these games can sometimes get kind of chippy. I would guess there's gonna be a few targeting calls in this one, just
absolutely.
just knowing these teams, but I mean, I would say that I think there's going to be some sharp, respected bettors probably on BYU +7 at home. I really do because it seems that at 7, in looking at the last games both these played, I think the Utah at a 7 was kind of the public play, but it's not a complete pros versus Joes like we've seen with other games, but it's kind of the sense I'm getting with this one.
And there's always we'll explain this real quick here. There's always the possibility that a lot of these line moves we see heading into midweek reverse back towards the end of the week. It's very hard to recognize for the general basic handicapper out there what's a real line move, what syndicate groups really like right off the
Mhm.
opener, and what they're pushing, hoping that the public money carries it even further
Yeah.
till they get their number and then come back the other way. So this
Yeah.
would be an instance where we see take back, Ben.
Get a
Um,
7.5, but I doubt that. But that's what they're hoping for. They would
yeah,
love that.
maybe you play it. I mean, I guess if you got in early, you got the best of the deal.
Mm.
But I think Utah's the better team. I really do. I just in a rivalry like this, having to win by more than a touchdown is a big ask.
It is in this one, and I kind of lean over based on what you said, and I watched some of that Weber State game. Like Brewer looked great, and I think BYU, if they're coming from behind, which they probably will be, I could see them getting like a late backdoor cover both ways, right? I could see this being like I don't know. Let's see, 24. I guess no, 31-17, and then a touchdown to the hit the over and the cover, or I guess a push in the last few minutes. It kind of has a feeling like that. So yeah, that one's going to be interesting. That's a late night game. I'm excited for that one. So let's see if anyone else has anything on Twitch or on Twitter. Let me know. I'm curious, Rob. Before we let you go, what's your most anticipated game that you're looking forward to this weekend?
Well, I think that the Washington Michigan game has a lot surrounding it, right? Jimmy Lake, when he took that job or got promoted into that job, I believe a lot of insiders thought he'd have instant success there, and you have to give him a pass on the coronavirus. I mean, after all, they should have played in the Pac-12 title game last year, right? But
Yeah,
coronavirus bit that
that
team,
was a
and
mess.
Oregon got sent there, and Oregon ends up winning it. But that loss was not pretty. 13, especially from an offensive perspective. Defensively, there was a lot of good in that game, but offensively, against a team that hasn't played since 2019, coming from FCS, now into the big house where Michigan looked, they had 5 touchdowns outside the red zone. I'm trying to think of when a Jim Harbaugh Michigan team had 5 touchdowns from outside the red
I
zone.
mean, you
It's
would probably have to go
crazy.
back to the maybe 2015. Like they
It
had some
just doesn't
explosive
happen.
guys, but maybe I even doubt that. And a Western Michigan team that I still think's pretty good. I mean, they took shots and they took them often, and they were successful.
Yeah, you just don't expect that type of, a pair of 70-yard touchdown passes, 3 long touchdown runs out of Michigan. So it'll be interesting to see against this defense, I guess, to get to my point, what they can really do. Because if one of these two teams shows up big in this game, um, especially Michigan, if they do, they're in the hunt. For Washington, they'll be right back in the hunt, and everybody will forget about that Montana game. So
Yeah,
I think that's got a lot of intrigue, and maybe the other one would be the Ohio State Oregon game. I mean, Oregon actually had a lot of hype surrounding them that they might have been the first that had the opportunity to be the first Pac-12 team to get into this Final Four or college football playoff. And week one didn't exactly get them any extra boost. So
no.
this a big one for them.
So this is interesting. This didn't really factor into how I looked at the game. I just was curious. So I wanted to see how teams performed the following week after losing to an FCS opponent. It's actually happened 27 times since 2015. We typically get a few every year, but teams after that are actually 10-17 against the spread. I was going to guess that they were going to be plus 52% against the spread just because of like the overreaction. But at the same time, though, if a team is bad, maybe they're just bad.
Right,
And
right.
that's how it should be. So, but I will say, though, I think Washington is taking a lot of sharp action in this one.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback play has to be a little bit better. Jimmy Lake team when he took that job, he's a no nonsense guy, right? He's a secondary coach,
Yeah.
defensive minded. But his quote was, "I don't play horizontal. We play vertical. We run downhill. We throw downfield." And aside from an early touchdown drive, we really didn't get a bunch of that out of Washington last week. So again, it could be we're looking ahead towards Michigan. We think we can roll Montana, so we're not going to put a lot of prep into this game, and maybe we'll use a week and a half of
Hmm.
this Montana week as Michigan prep. You never know. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why week 1 to 2 teams a lot of times show such different identities. And
Yeah. And one thing I will say, and Rob, you're probably familiar with this or aware, but I would say 99% confident to some extent that Washington headed into the Montana game was practicing looks for Michigan to some
right,
extent. And
right,
people could call me crazy, but I've seen that, and I'm not saying they spend 50% of the time, but they will have the scout team run a few looks just to kind of prepare, which it sounds crazy and it almost sounds silly and stupid now looking back at that, something like that where you're like, oh, look what happened. They lost to Montana. But that's how some of these teams actually will set up some of their practices, as crazy as it sounds. So yeah, you don't know if that was happening, which I think it was. But now this Washington team could come in and look like a totally different team.
Right.
So
And that's what has people scratching their heads after week 2 of college football. Like, what? That's not supposed to
yeah,
happen. But
yeah,
especially Ben, when they have 6 months, you have all off season to prepare for your opener or
yep,
your week 2 game if that's the one you're pointing towards. So that's a
exactly.
lot of
Yep,
preparation time.
yep, and yeah, all from the start of August 1st, more or less, at some point within that 30-day window, they're looking at Michigan film.
Right.
That's just how it works, and they weren't prepared for Montana like they should have been. So uh props to props to the Grizzlies. So one game that I'm looking forward to, Rob, is Texas A&M Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the line was interesting because it seems like it's at a stale at 17, because I think if it comes off of that one way or another, I think the Sharps are going to pound it either way. I feel like 17 is a pretty good number there, but I'm curious your thoughts on that one, because we do have Texas A&M coming into the altitude. It is going to be an Empower Field where the Broncos play, but curious if you have any leans on that one.
Well, my original thought process on it was A&M's front seven is so good, and to me, Colorado needs Broussard to get going for everything else to work off of that, right? And you would just, I mean, on paper, it would seem like A&M could shut the run game down and then put a lot of heat on the freshman quarterback, JT
Yeah.
Shrout, who got hurt in summer. Kind of hurts that team a little bit, but you got a freshman quarterback who's not, and a dual threat at that, who's not going to be able to, I would say, use sideline to sideline speed against a defense as fast as this one. And
Yeah,
then
and
it
he's not
comes
going to
down to,
stretch the field either.
yeah,
That's
can he throw accurately, and can they devise some sort of short passing game that
mhm.
gets completions and clock moving and first downs and churn and that type of thing. It's tough, Ben. I thought Colorado's offense was a bad matchup for this particular defense. Now, when you lay 17 and the other side is Jimbo Fisher, as conservative as he is,
Yeah.
you don't like to get involved there on the road either, laying 17. So it's a tough, like you say, the number probably means everything. If you get under 17 and you say to yourself, yeah, I think A&M could win 31-14, that sounds reasonable, lay
Yeah.
16 and a half. 17 and a half, you're going the other way. So I'd be interested to see how Colorado does offensively in this game.
Yeah, so a guy I'm high on, Dustin Crum, Kent
Mm-hmm.
State lost 10-41. He went 12 for 26 and only had 89 yards, 2 interceptions. I mean, he's going to go into MAC play and he's going to have
Right.
350 games. So it just kind of shows that this Texas A&M team and their defense is no joke. They're the real deal. And I'm also worried that Brendan Lewis didn't have enough like real offensive looks, because that offense they were running was just so vanilla. They were just handing the ball off. I mean, very basic route concepts. So now, I mean, do you think it's going to be a flick of the switch and now he's going to perform? I don't think so. I mean, I initially was kind of leaning over because in my head I'm like, maybe Colorado State or Colorado kept some things off film, but at the end of the day, I mean, this Texas A&M defense is probably going to be one of the top, maybe top 10 in all of college football. So I'm not touching anything in this one because I have too many question marks. There's a lot going on.
And I think the Kent State point is great because Kent State is a team that will test your conditioning because they
Yeah.
go so fast. They want to run 80, 90 plays. And in the heat in College Station last week, it was not a bother.
Nope.
So at some point, personnel is personnel, right? I mean, you can have all the emotion coming into a game that you want, but at some point that emotion wears off and talent takes over. And A&M with that defense, if Broussard gets going, it's a different story, Ben. But I just don't see Broussard getting going against that rush defense.
Do you? And I didn't watch the Texas A&M game, but does it worry you at all that King had 3 interceptions? I didn't see if they were just
Yes.
bad throws, but
No, but that is a concern. I had it in my notes for a show we did today that, you have a freshman quarterback here on the road, first time. Um, Colorado's capable of showing different looks and confusing the kids. So, at the price tag of 17, again, a conservative head coach and a freshman quarterback, he didn't look like the kid from Alabama looked
Yeah,
in his opening
that's
start. Looked like he'd been
that's for
there his
sure.
whole career. So,
God,
yeah,
Alabama just next one up, step
it's
right up, and
crazy.
just it's unbelievable. I'm
Yeah,
I think Rob, I might look at a first half line for Colorado or just a live play if anything. But yeah, I wish I had something in this one that I liked enough because I'm going to be watching this whole game. I'm a Colorado Buffs fan, but
hmm
it's just a tough line to try to find some value in at minus 17. And you have it's a neutral site, but Colorado's going to fill that stadium decently. It's not sold out. There's going to be a lot of Texas A&M fans there because they do travel well.
right.
But the altitude, the altitude is always that differentiating factor in some of these lines. But I would say that maybe it's accounted for in this one a little, but I don't know. It's always something to watch for, especially third, fourth quarter.
Well, and let's say this for your viewers, Ben, is that the offensive coordinator at Colorado, Darren Shiverini, is an air raid guy.
Yep.
And if he wants to push the pedal, because remember, when you travel in college football, you can't bring as many players as you have at a home game.
Mm-hmm.
I think the limit is 60 that go
60, and then it can go up to I think it's like 90, or
when you're home.
yeah, you can. Yep.
And
So how does that work for if you're the home team, like a Colorado at a neutral site? Does that still apply? I always forget how that works.
I think that still applies, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's listed as their home game, whether they play it on their home field or not.
Okay,
It's still
that's
their
right.
home game. And so if you do want to try and wear A&M down, their depth is a little less because you can only bring 60 and you have altitude on your side and you push the pedal. And Shiverini obviously he comes from that tree, so he could
Yeah.
do it. The question becomes, does Colorado have the parts this year to pull that off? There isn't a Laviska Chenault. There is, they
Yeah,
got
they
a
got
lot of
Levante,
receivers. They got
his brother.
Levante.
But I will say, to your point, the receiving core is probably the weakest they've had in a few years. But the rushing is where I think they're the strongest at. But that's what Texas A&M can take away. So now you're saying, well, can they just get away with putting guys in and just switching them out on the receiving core? I don't know. Yeah, so that's tough. I know they're going to try to push the pace, but it could be one of those things where if they have 3 and outs with Texas A&M,
Yeah.
then that's going to play right into Texas A&M's game, and they'll control the clock there.
And
Yeah,
their offensive line and their ground game is no joke for A&M. So
yeah,
on the defensive side of the football, Colorado's front seven has to hold up, and that's not an easy task either.
yeah. Someone said Liberty versus Troy. I don't have any notes on that personally. That's a one-off one. Let's see. The other one was cut off. Let's see. NO. It's probably North Carolina, maybe. Do you think they bounce back?
I think they should. I think they
Yeah.
should. They've got the right opponent too. I think it's Georgia State, right, against UNC, and
Yeah.
and
I was
there's been
thinking
a
over there.
there's been a push to the over. I think it was
Yeah.
64 to 66, which makes a lot of sense because Sam Howell probably bounces back big time, and they're a team that scores the quick strike variety when they're the better personnel. So you
Yeah.
could see them with some really quick hitters against Georgia State. And Georgia State, for
Not
what
bad.
it's worth, can score as well.
Yeah.
So, we had this discussion earlier today on another show, Ben. I don't mean to drag it out, but real quick, where college football is concerned, the under was a real good play. If you just blindly bet
It
every single
was.
under, you wind up, I think, 57% or something, maybe better
Yeah.
for the
I think
week.
it, I think it was even better. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was like 57 winners and 30 something losses. But, guys are searching already for answers. Why did that happen? And it's, off of week one, it doesn't mean it's going to happen the remainder of the year. But from a fundamental standpoint, forget all the handicapping angles and the odds maker might be pushing totals too high now. From a fundamental standpoint, with all these spreads, and the Big 12 is the conference that gets slapped around the most as far as people taking shots at them for being so poor defensively, right? The
Yes.
spread, Art Briles got there first and really changed offensive football in college football. And so Iowa State's defensive coordinator, John Heacock, um, we had to come up with a solution. He comes up with a 3-2-6 defense, which has now become the rage in college football. Basically, it's drop 8 coverage. Just
Yeah.
put 8 men in coverage and force you. Then you run against a light box. If you can run, you still run. But if you can't run, then the passing is taken away. Mike Leach says every time we come out of the huddle at Mississippi State, we're staring at drop 8. And I think that umbrella type style, let's not let anything get over our heads
Mm-hmm.
and limit explosive plays, is a little bit of a contributing factor as to why games would be 2, 3, 4 points less scoring
Yeah.
over the course of time. And an over 66 only reaches 63. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's a
That's a
combination of things.
that's a really good point. So my thought process is maybe with crowds returning, but in my head though, you would think the odds makers would already account for that, right?
Yeah, and I think they know. Really, what odds makers know is they know their customers.
Yep.
And they know that come Saturday morning, there's going to be more over bets than there are under bets. So a game that they would line at 64, they probably line at 65 and a half because they know it's not going to make a difference
We
to the
we
$50
saw
bill.
that in I think it was either I think it was week 3 of the NFL last year where I mean, I think totals went over like 65% and then 62 the next week. And then I told everyone, I'm like, you think the odds makers aren't aware of this stuff, guys? Come on. And
Right.
then week 3, I think it was week 3, we saw like it was 40%. It was a crazy drop off. So not saying that it's going to be this week, but you definitely have to really break things down because some of this could be accounted for. And I don't think we'll see anything like that in week 2, like we saw in week 1. I think you make a really good point that it's going to be it's accounted for and it's inflated a little bit.
And in the end, with these games, we're always betting against numbers. I mean, we could talk and analyze all we want, but really, we're always looking for the best number. If the odds maker is inflating things, even though we might think it's supposed to score
Yeah, the teams are still
highly
out
the
there
game,
playing.
you have to
Yeah.
come back the other way. And your point, real quick, because the same point was made by a colleague of mine today, especially where NFL is concerned, that crowds really in the NFL bother offenses. They get you to get illegal procedure, false start
Yep.
calls, and all kinds of things. That disruption was not there last year for an offense with nobody in the stands.
Yeah, and I think the difference between college football and uh, NFL on that point is more offenses in NFL. Well, I should say more. All of them are more complex. I mean, in college, you could have a spread offense that literally has like 10 plays, and you're literally just
Right.
changing the personnel and the formation, but you're literally running the same 10 plays, and then your pre-snap read. If guys aren't in the box, then you just hand it off. So that it's a lot simpler versus NFL. You didn't have fans in the stands, and I think I heard someone say that guys had to like whisper in the huddle because they were scared that it was that quiet. So it's going to be really interesting to see if it's a foreshadow to what we saw week 1 in college football, if that carries over to week 1 of the NFL.
It's something we're all looking at real
Yeah.
closely.
But yeah, then you could psych yourself out in the books. Maybe they're already accounting for that. So I think at the end of the
Right.
day, with I think the point you're trying to say is you got to stick to your principles. You can't get too caught up in that because as soon as you do and you're on the wrong side, yeah, it can get bad if you heavily play like a crazy trend angle like that on multiple plays.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, I appreciate it. Looking forward to these games. Real quick, before you hop off, just let the listeners know where they can find you at.
Yeah. For all of the media content that I do during the week, multiple shows. And thank you, Ben, for having me here on your show. But wagertalk.com is where you can find the bulk of my work. Wagertalk.com, and I'd encourage anybody watching here, you go sign up, it's for free. All they ask is your email address, and then you have open access to shows upon shows, day after day, any sport you choose. You'll get analysis of just about every game, really, from Wager Talk analysts and hosts. So that's wagertalk.com if you're interested in selection packages and picking up what I'm playing, what I'm subscribing, or what I'm giving to subscribers. Then that's also at wagertalk.com. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's real easy. It's at Rob Vino Sports.
Love it. Okay, I have one quick question for you because this game has been on my mind.
Yeah.
Texas, Arkansas.
I heard an argument for Texas today. I don't agree with it. I
What
like
was what was the
Arkansas.
argument?
The argument was anti-Arkansas because Rice was 17-17 with them in the fourth quarter. But I guess I just saw it differently, Ben, because my view of that was pro Rice. Rice
Yeah,
played really, really well defensively in that
yeah,
game, and it took a couple of late picks because Rice's quarterback play isn't quite there yet. I think Wiley Green started and Luke McCaffrey came off the bench in the fourth. But a couple of late picks by Arkansas led to real short touchdown drives. My view of that game was Rice defensively under Bloomgren, who was a Stanford assistant. They've come a long, long way, and they caused Arkansas fits. And I don't blame Arkansas for that. In fact, the fact that they won 38-17, I kind of give them a plus for.
yeah.
Now they're going to go to Texas, and I just feel like Arkansas is an underrated team. I've had a little check mark next to them since the summer because they're that team in the SEC West that everybody feels is the doormat because they won't win 8 games, but they can cover games, and I think they're a thorn in anybody's side on any given Saturday. So I like Arkansas in that game.
I have told my Discord group. I said I might sprinkle money line on Arkansas
Yeah,
because I think the narrative is Texas is back after one game. I think the thing I'm going to be looking for in this one and what I expect is I think they're going to try to load the box to some extent on certain formations and make Robinson, try to beat you with another guy in the box. But they're going to try to say, hey, Hudson Card, let's see what you're made of.
right.
If he comes out and slings the ball around, Texas probably wins by 10, 14 points. But I'm still not sold on him. It's been one game, so I'm still waiting. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm expecting for in this one. I think Arkansas is getting some value. So yeah.
Barry Odom is a veteran defensive coordinator. He'll have something up his. I mean, that's a really good coaching staff there that
Oh yeah.
they've put together, and the entire team bought into it. And personnel wise, for those who don't know, they've got real SEC. I mean, their receiving core, especially their lead receiver, you could argue is one of the 4 best in the SEC. So, and they're not short on talent at
They're not
Arkansas.
Vanderbilt. we'll,
They're not
we'll
Vanderbilt,
we'll put
right?
it that way. Yeah. Yeah.
So
They have talent. They
I'm
have
with you.
talent, and I'm just getting this sentiment, and the public's on Texas. I mean, it was one game, and they beat a good ULL team. I'll give them that, right? And I
Hmm.
think ULL didn't play their best football, but they still, and a lot of people were on ULL, but I think we don't want to overreact too much on Texas's performance.
They will lay an egg every now and again.
They will. I mean, if we've learned anything, I know it's a new coaching staff, but it's kind of like I'm trying to kind of like a Michigan, but like as soon as you get high on a Texas team, we kind of know what happens.
I mean,
So
Oklahoma got pushed by Tulane last week, so certainly Texas out of the Big 12 can get pushed by
yeah,
Arkansas.
that was wow. I was watching that at a bar, and I
Hmm.
was cheering for Tulane. I initially thought he had that first down, but saw the replay and he was short. But man, what a performance! I thought that Oklahoma defense was going to be a little better, but I know it's one game, but that was the whole narrative, right? Like this is the
Yeah,
best defense Oklahoma's had in 10 years, and Tulane comes down and scores 40 on them. So, all
crazy.
right, Rob, I'll let you go. I really appreciate the time, all the knowledge, and best of luck with the bets this weekend.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Same to you. I'm sure we'll talk in between now and then, but Hope to be back with you next week, and good luck to everybody watching us. Hopefully you catch some tickets.
Yep. Appreciate it. All right. See you later.